Welcome to the Film Threat Podcast. I am Chris Gore. We have a very special interview for you today with the filmmakers behind Happy Happy Joy Joy, which premieres at the Sundance Film Festival. I'm super excited to have them on the show. Real quick before we start the interview, help support Film Threat. Follow us on social media. We're Film Threat on everything. Also, we do have a Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/filmthreat. And we do have a sponsor that's helping us out, magicspoon.com, which is actually, I think, appropriate for having the filmmakers of Happy Happy Joy Joy here. As a veteran of Saturday morning cartoon television, I was a fan of sugar cereal. As an adult, cannot really eat the current incarnation of sugar cereal. Magic Spoon, if you go to magicspoon.com, use the referral code Film Threat. That's one word, Film Threat. You'll help support the podcast. You will also get a high protein, low carb sugar cereal that tastes just like the cereal you had as a kid. It's amazing. I've been enjoying it. So help support Film Threat with that. Now let's talk to Ren Cicero, Kimo Easterwood, the filmmakers behind Happy Happy Joy Joy, documentary about Ren and Stimpy. Welcome to the Film Threat Podcast.
Chris, stoked to be here.
Thank you for having us.
Well, I'm first of all ecstatic to have you here because you've been working on this documentary for some time. And full disclosure, I'm actually in the documentary.
Yes, you are.
I make a brief appearance here and there.
Critical brief appearance. Though.
Yes.
Big laughs from Chris Gore.
But it's Ren and Stimpy was a cartoon that transformed the industry. I mean, animation was, it was really dead in the 80s, early 90s, really a platform to just promote toys. Ren and Stimpy changed everything. How did you discover Ren and Stimpy? What motivated you to want to make a documentary about this a transformative cartoon that just, it's a milestone in animation?
Yeah, it certainly is. It was a couple of different events that came together. So Todd White, who worked with John Kricfalusi, the creator of Ren and Stimpy. Todd worked with John on, I think it was at the Ripping Friends. Yeah. So he had some history with John. And I had been working primarily in commercial television production, and Kimo was shooting some short docs and had a thriving still career. And we've known each other for 25 years, always wanted to work together. So Todd kept pitching this idea to Kimo, like, oh, this guy John K. and Ren and Stimpy, you got to do this. You got to do a documentary. And so I'd been bouncing around for a couple of years, and then finally I was just completely burnt out in the commercial business. And I called Kimo. I'm like, it's now or never. We need to work on something. And he's like, well, Todd's got this guy John K. and this cartoon Ren and Stimpy, which I had seen maybe once or twice. Kimo living in Hawaii.
Never seen it.
Oh my God.
Never seen it. And so we're like, okay. So we did about an hour's worth of research, and then we're like, okay, let's dive in. Had we known that the next 3.5 years of our life was going to be consumed with Ren and Stimpy, we might have given it just a little bit more time and consideration. But we're super stoked we did, because the art is really what drew us in, and it's an extraordinary story.
Well, and also, you did a Kickstarter or an Indiegogo?
Indiegogo, yeah.
Okay, well, I want to get back to the doc, but on the Indiegogo, the Kickstarter, you created, and I have to thank you for this, you created a whole sort of primer for anyone wanting to, do a Kickstarter or a crowdfunding campaign. My record on crowdfunding campaigns is 50-50. I've failed as many times as I've succeeded, but you created this document that was really useful for filmmakers. I'll just say I've sent it out to many filmmakers.
Sure.
So yeah, exactly. So I don't know, email me at filmthreat@gmail.com. I'll send what you created, but what are some of the bullet points of advice for filmmakers that came from that document? What you learned? You learned by failure yourself.
Oh, absolutely. So we were way overly optimistic when it came to our initial Kickstarter campaign. I think, we looked at the initial budget, and that's what we asked for. Mm-hmm. And I think you can still find it. I think it's still up. It was like $250,000, which was a massive mistake. Because what you find out is you hear these stories that, oh my God, such and such made so many millions of dollars on Kickstarter. But that's really an anomaly. And you see, and you can read this in the document, but the platforms really have shifted over to more tech and products, and film has kind of taken a little bit of a back seat. So you have to keep that in mind. So I would say set really conservative goals. Really be very cognizant of your social media and how you build that audience, and take the time to build that audience, whether it's email lists, and also just in general, how you go about the social media aspect of it. I mean, I know that sounds like, oh, just do social media, but I really encourage you to look through that document for the kind of more tactical points of social media. Real quick, for example, with Facebook, you think, oh, well, I have 10,000 people on my page. I'm going to post something and all 10,000 people are going to see it. Facebook isn't worth billions of dollars because they let you do free publicity.
Right.
Maybe 600 people will see it. So don't go into it thinking, oh, this is going to be a breeze. If I get $1 for every one of my fans on Facebook, it's going to be a sure thing. Not going to happen.
Yeah, Kimo, in fact, I remember running into you at San Diego Comic-Con. I was in line for Hall H. You guys were passing out postcards, and that was the campaign I think that didn't fund. And I learned the same lesson, which is set a modest goal and then stretch goals. That's really the way to do it. But this has been a huge journey. I mean, in addition to some funding from crowdfunding, you had to mortgage your home.
No, I sold my house.
You sold your house.
Yeah.
Car too.
Wait,
This
what?
guy doesn't have a car.
Yeah.
You don't own a car right now?
No.
Kimo gave you a ride?
He did. Well, he Ubered to my house and then I took him.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the crazy thing is we had version 1 of the film done. And that was a celebration of the series. John had refused to participate up until that point. And then when we were typing up the credits, I mean, we're talking we invested in all editorial, motion graphics. The film's done. We sent it to Viacom. They're like, oh, we love it. It's done. A week later, the news breaks about John K., which we can get into in a little bit.
Yeah.
But that completely upended our film. How are you going to celebrate a series which is now tainted by some of the misdeeds of the creator? Now what?
Okay, well, now I remember this. It was at WonderCon. I showed the trailer.
Yes.
You let me show the trailer to people, and then I believe it was the very next week, like Monday, this news hit about John Kricfalusi, and it's sort of a different situation than it's not a traditional Me Too moment.
Correct.
There were women who came out and said, "Hey, when we became involved, these women were under the age of 18."
Correct.
And effectively, his career ended the day that news hit.
Correct. Yeah, he had some deals in place. He was starting up a new animation studio, and that news hit, and he paid the price for it.
Well, the fanciful version of the documentary, that no longer exists.
Correct.
I'm sure you have a copy of it somewhere.
Buried.
Right.
Multiple hard drives somewhere.
But now this is like 2 years later, a journey to gain. How did you gain John Kricfalusi's trust to speak on camera, not just about Ren and Stimpy, but also about his involvement with women that he should not have been involved in?
Right. Yeah, so the whole irony is we were originally going to start with interviewing John, and he just kept refusing, even with the connection to Todd, our mutual friend, the artist. And so we are like, you know what, the Ren and Stimpy story is interesting enough, and there's enough other artists that contributed to the show that it's well worth pursuing this as a subject anyway. So we spent a couple of months trying to corral people to talk about it, because the other part of this is that it was a professional, and in some respects a personal divorce as well, because John was fired from the show, and that created a whole lot of discord. Some people stayed with Nickelodeon, others went with John, so that whole creative family broke up. So you had this part of it where you're calling artists and saying, hey, look, I know you don't know me, but how would you like to talk to me about your professional divorce 25 years ago? That was like the most painful event in your life, you know? So that took a bit of time, but once Bill Ray and a couple of the other initial artists agreed to come on, the word spread. And so we got a number of interviews, like 20, 25 interviews. Mind you, John was still dead set against participating. Mm-hmm. We finish that version of the film, the celebration, the news breaks, all hell breaks loose. We're now thinking, oh my God, we just spent, all our money on a film that is toxic. Now what? That's where we sell the house, we get rid of the car, and we're like, okay, we're in this. We're going to do version 2 of it. Around that time, Richard Purcell, who was John's assistant, he was a writer on a number of the episodes, an artist. He was always kind of the go-between. It was enormously helpful. And he's like, you know what? I think John might change his mind now. And then sure enough, a couple weeks later, Richard connects us. We start a conversation with John, which then takes another 6 months before he even agrees to sit down on camera.
You really had to put effort into. Look, he's confronting all of his demons from the past, right?
Yes.
The demons involving the divorce. People like Bob Camp, who was a writer and an artist on the show, writer, artist, director. It really was. It changed the industry from the standpoint of it became more of a creator-driven form.
Correct.
After Ren and Stimpy, which I'm so glad that you touch upon in the film, but this just changes everything. So he's confronting literally every demon, and having seen the doc, it really was personally sad for me from the standpoint that I knew everybody. Richard Purcell was like a close friend for years and years after Ren and Stimpy ended. So I knew all those guys because a buddy of mine named Glenn Barr was a background artist on the show, and he lived in like the guest house behind where I lived at the time off Melrose. And it was like, Spunko was walkable from where I was at the time. So I was there for barbecues. My daughter and John Kricfalusi share the same birthday.
Oh my God.
It was so we would hang out there. No, it was fun, but like when that thing happened, it was like a choose your side. Are you with the Nickelodeon corporate Bob Camp driven version of Spumco, or are you going to be with the John K original? You're going to go off with John. It was horrible at the time.
Yeah, I imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah, those guys, and they were all so close. It's not like they just worked together. Well, they were working like 18 hours a day trying to get the show out.
Right.
And then it was like war, they're forged in the pits together,
And you see where so much of the pain came from, not only from John's past with, he had a very strict father.
Right.
You see the divide, and you see how John was just a perfectionist to like the extremes. I guess I was like afflicted with perfection. It was perfliction. In a sense,
yeah, totally.
To make up a word, he's just like he was a guy that it was never done.
That's right.
He and George Lucas, it's never done. You can always make it better. You see why it resulted in some of cartoons that we talk about to today.
Right.
Space Madness. Just so many.
Stimpy's Invention is a
right. That's another great one.
Yeah, it's amazing.
We're still talking about these cartoons that aired on Nickelodeon, which was really not the network for Ren
That's
and Stimpy.
right.
Let's be frank. So when this news broke, you knew you basically had to start almost from scratch.
Yeah, it almost made it more difficult, right? Because when there's that sense of completion, and nobody wants to go back and then have to redo something, especially after you've just spent a year and a half doing it, and feeling like you had something that was reasonably successful. But we just knew, what are we going to do? We're going to have this hard drive that's going to be a doorstop, and we put so much into it, and we really felt for guys like Chris Riccardi and Bill Ray, we wanted to tell those guys' story too.
Right. Oh my God. It's just. When you look at the legacy of what Ren and Stimpy did, Ren and Stimpy really sort of planted this flag on cartoons had become basically a corporate marketing tool for
toys,
sugar cereal, toys, all this stuff. It was just like, oh, okay, cool. Well, you just create a cartoon, and this is it's like a paid endorsement. You've got 30 minutes to promote the toys.
That's right.
And John wanted nothing to do with that.
Yeah, and as we cover in the movie, just about every facet of the show is extraordinary, from the voices to the artwork to the music selection to the color to, it really, they took so much care. Chris Riccardi would talk about how they would work, 18 hours a day doing all these drawings. And then on the weekends, they would not either be in the studio drawing or they would be in a recording session coming up with music or redoing music. I mean, it's just the level of a detail and commitment was just extraordinary.
Yeah. I don't think you can underestimate like the phenomena that Ren and Stimpy was when it came out in the early 90s. I mean, it was just like, it was this thing that was a total surprise, that first episode, and it just hit the zeitgeist like right at the right time. It was one of those things where I think that children can watch it and enjoy it. But adults are getting far more out of it.
Yes.
They're getting way more out of watching it just because clearly all those other layers are there. Yeah. Do you remember at the time when it hit? It was just like this. It was this big phenomenon. I mean, I know you said you heard of it, but it was everywhere.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting. I mean, I was a little past cartoons then, and didn't but had certainly heard of it and seen the shirts and. You look now and how fervent the fans are. I mean, they are so committed. And it's interesting because if this would have happened now, it would have been all over social media, all over Twitter, and everybody that felt like, oh, this is mine. And it's just this little cult show that I've discovered would have been all over the place. But because there wasn't social media back then, everybody felt like took ownership of it, like they discovered it. And so it's really interesting, the timing of it. But yeah, you're right. I mean, and I think that's the other thing. I mean, we were looking at the episodes, right? I mean, you remember looking at them and going, oh my God, this is amazing, right? I mean,
absolutely. And it's funny, it's because even Bobby Lee in the film says that he says the line like, oh, I felt that this was mine when he first saw it. But that's a lot of people's story. Right. It's not just his. Everyone has the same reaction, is that they almost stumbled across like a Playboy channel they weren't supposed to get or something.
Right. Totally.
And like, is this supposed to even be on the air?
Yeah, totally.
So many people had that same reaction.
How did you, in dealing with, is it Viacom, right?
Yes.
Yeah. How did you deal with them in terms of getting clearances? I mean...
So this is the mistake a first-time filmmaker makes. That is a good mistake because you're way overly optimistic, and nobody in the right mind should start a project like this without getting clearance first. You're a moron if you don't. So here we are. We're like, you know what? We believe in this, and we think this is a story that needs to be told. So we're like 8 months into shooting, and finally we're like, you know what? We should probably reach out to Viacom.
Right.
And we did. And I got to tell you, they were amazing from the start. They were very clear. They said, look, we're not going to take any ownership of this. We're not going to support this because this could be a potentially, landmine. But as long as you don't disparage the network, we're open to taking a look at the cut, which of course we took as, hey, they gave us permission.
Right.
No, they did not. But they were awesome. Chris Viscardi at that point was the head of animation library properties at the time. Right. He was great. And then Lauren Mitchell, who was over there. He was kind of the director of licensing. He was a go-between. And those guys were just awesome. And that's why we were so excited when we sent them that first cut of the first version of the movie that they loved it and supported us.
It's very balanced. It's a balanced view. I actually, I never knew the corporate side of the story, right? I only knew the John Kricfalusi side of the story, which was they're an evil corporation,
right?
Which is sort of an easy narrative to sort of default go to, right? Like the evil company was horrible.
Corporate overlords are horrible to the creative people.
But what's interesting is, and I think this is true with artists like not just John Kricfalusi, but also David Lynch and whatnot, is almost when you have that sort of the oppressive corporate overlord, it forces you to be more creative. I mean, just as an example, I remember that John wanted to use the word booger in an episode, and Nickelodeon was like, you can't use the word booger. Yeah. So John came up with the word nose goblin. Yeah. Right, which is actually, I think, way cooler than booger. Booger's first of all, how dumb, you can't use booger. So in a way, and I think that with David Lynch, and Twin Peaks, so many things go under the radar, right? Right. That I think a wildly creative person like a John Kay or a David Lynch, when they're sort of given these restrictions, the pushback against the restrictions forces some new creativity.
Definitely.
That I think is perhaps better than just doing the obvious, right? Like.
Yeah, definitely. And that was certainly one of the questions we were exploring. And it didn't come out directly in the film, but you see various aspects of it. And that question is do creative people need boundaries, and do they create better work because of it? And it seemed universally that was the case. I mean, Nose Goblins is a great example. There were some other examples where whole episodes might not have gotten done. Even
right.
and even John, he talks about the heart and how important that was to the story, but he didn't really want to do it but it was Vanessa who kept saying, "Look, you need that element." Yeah. Right. And
one of the best episodes ever created because of that.
Yeah,
So.
It's so funny because in it you explore that, like, when he pushes the heart, but he would push back against the heart. See, I don't know that John. I don't think he doesn't really admit it, but I think if he was being perfectly honest with himself about that, the corporate sort of pushback actually made him better as an artist.
Definitely. And touched on it earlier. It's just the perfectionism, and that is the art is certainly something. For me personally, that attracted me to the subject, but it was also the perfectionism, and that's something that I personally had a really hard time with, and I kind of took it step by step. I took a stand-up comic class to kind of break me of that, but it can be really debilitating if you look at your work and you're like, oh, I can't make a mistake, or that mistake shows that I don't have a talent in a particular area. So I could definitely relate to John in that respect, where the work just became him. And when you're trying to get acceptance and then you experience something that maybe isn't 100% perfect, which what is, that it can be soul crushing in a lot of ways, and not because of the outside, but because of what you're doing to yourself. And so I really responded to that, and this whole experience has been definitely a period of growth for me professionally, looking at not only the downside of John in terms of how he dealt with perfectionism, and how certain people were there to kind of help him get out of that, and to greater or lesser degree, they were successful. He didn't quite crawl out of that hole.
Well, it's interesting because I did have a view. We did a cover story on Film Threat about Ren Stimpy, which I think you used in the documentary.
Oh, that's great.
And I did another magazine called Wild Cartoon Kingdom, so continue to, which kind of came from that. But so I had this sort of journalistic view, but I knew them all personally, but never saw that corporate side. And I think it's well represented in the doc. I think that this is also, we should talk about these. These are not Me Too type of accusations, right? These aren't accusations. This is documented. This is something that John admits to, that during the course of Ren and Stimpy happening, he met girls that were 14, 15 years old, right? On via AOL Messenger, I think it was, and had ongoing online relationships with them, where he, he intimated, he wasn't explicit, but it intimated many things, and then went on to have a relationship with one of those girls when she was underage. Correct. This is something he also fully admits to. This is not, like I say, this is not an accusation. It's something he fully, he fully admits to having a relationship. I mean, they moved in together.
Right.
How did you get him to discuss this? Because I don't think I've ever seen an as honest because you see the people that get accused of Me Too accusation ends up being a he said, she said, and well, she thinks this and I think this, and you decide. In this, it's, all they're here.
All the cards are on the table.
All the cards are on the table. They're telling you this, and John is saying, yeah, I did that. Yeah. How did you get him to even talk about it? I say for me personally, like, knowing everyone involved is really emotional for me to watch that, because I knew all of them. I had no awareness that was happening at the time. I knew that John had a younger girlfriend who worked on the show, but that was so typical of Hollywood. I mean, Hollywood is the land of, dating a woman half your age, right? Yeah. As long as she's over 18, I guess that's sort of, I mean, that and traffic is bad in LA. I mean,
of course. Yeah.
So how did you get him to talk about it so openly?
Well, it did help that we had the time with him ahead of time, meaning that the 6 months that we sat with him multiple times a month to watch UFC fights, because we had a common interest in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, so that helped. And so, regardless of who you're sitting across, you have to have a tremendous amount of empathy for them. Whatever they did, whether it's to the Harvey Weinstein level or to the lesser level of John, not to condone his behavior at all, but it is to a lesser degree, and we can talk about that more. But it's really about establishing that empathy, because at the end of the day, when people do awful things, there's still a part of them that's just like me. They want to be loved, they want to have success, they want to do this. So you connect with that part of them, and we were very honest with him from the outset. Like, John, you need to talk about this. Like, we're going to cover everything about the show, and we started this to celebrate the show, but this is going to have to be something that's going to address. I mean, how can you not? And so he was prepared for that. We gave him the questions ahead of time, and we told him, look, you don't even have to sign the release until you're done with the interviews. And we did 3 separate interviews. Of course, the last interview was him talking about these accusations. And I think at that point, he trusted that we weren't going to throw him under the bus. We were going to give a very fair representation of what happened. Again, we pressed him. We didn't condone his behavior. We didn't excuse his behavior. And, whether John ultimately finds redemption, is, I think he's still working through this. And we also had a tremendous amount of empathy and responsibility to Robin, who went through this, because she was underage and he shouldn't have been with her. And we all, recognize that. So now, what is the punishment? And then at some point, do we get to a point where we go, okay, he's been punished enough. That's not for me to decide, but we collectively as a society have to kind of figure out.
What's the punishment?
Yeah, what's the punishment?
How long?
Yeah.
Do you not work for the rest of your life? Is it for 6 months?
Yeah.
And
that's a really hard, that's why we have a legal system that third parties can go, you know what, you're emotionally invested, we're going to be the neutral third party that's going to make that determination.
Well, I mean, let's be honest, the music industry, everyone from Elvis to Jerry Lee Lewis.
Oh, you can go on and on, yeah.
They all, David Bowie, they all dated young girls.
Yeah.
So this is something that's been prevalent for some time. I think one of the greatest things about the documentary, which also it hasn't screened publicly yet.
Correct.
It screens at Sundance next week.
Yes, correct.
But I think that what I love about the doc is that it doesn't tell you what to think.
Correct.
It doesn't lay judgment on John, right? It just sort of like, and here's the facts, you decide. I actually think that you may get some pushback from audiences about that, but I also think that was the best approach. Is it for you to judge? It's certainly for the audience to make their own determination.
Yeah, but part of what we wanted to do also was when people leave the theater, they kind of have this, like they can talk about it after.
Right.
A lot of movies, once the credits roll, it's like, okay, let's go get pizza,
Right.
But this is kind of something we were hoping that people will talk about when they're leaving the theater, on the way home from the theater, and just kind of start a conversation that
Definitely.
way, So that was important.
Yeah, it is going to have that continuing conversation coming out of the theater. Where is John now in all this? I mean, he's effectively gone into forced retirement in a sense.
Yeah, more or less. I mean, I think he's still reckoning with what happened. No question about it. I think it's really up to the industry. I think it's really up to maybe Robin and some of his other victims and accusers to kind of reconcile. I think part of the challenge with the whole movement, as a white male who's looking at it from the outside, not having experienced exactly that, is that it's went overlooked for so long, and there was so much justifiable anger. how do you tamper that now when people are feeling like I finally got my voice? You know what I mean? So I imagine it's extraordinarily difficult to try to be reflective in this moment and say, okay, this guy's had enough punishment, or even not even make that judgment to say, well, what are those boundaries of punishment? So, and that's another reason why, we didn't want to make that. We're not apologists. We're not condoning his behavior. On the other side, we're not there to say, oh, Robin, you should forgive him now, because that's not what we're saying either. Yeah. That all has to happen on their own speed. At some point, again, a third party may have to come in and kind of mitigate this to make it equitable, but that's not for us as filmmakers to make that judgment.
Yeah, and John only does one thing. He draws.
Yeah,
that's it. He doesn't know how to do anything else.
That's it. That's totally it.
When I met him, he didn't even know how to drive.
Yeah.
This is what's weird. Funny story about John from back when I knew him is that he didn't know how to drive, so he always just had people drive him.
Yep.
Right.
And he worked at a art board drawing all day, and didn't realize that he needed glasses. So when he finally learned to drive, he got glasses. It's like, then he finally saw the world for the first time with glasses, because he was nearsighted, but didn't know he was nearsighted into adulthood.
Amazing.
Wow.
Which is the strangest thing. I mean, how would you know? I mean, you only need to see be farsighted if you're driving.
Right. Sure. Oh, that's funny. Yeah. Wow. And you touch on a great point, is John is, and this goes back to the perfectionism, the obsessiveness, that he is consumed with cartoons. And this, again, is not excusing his behavior. You take somebody that's all they have ever, and I mean, like, we go, oh, I'm obsessed with this movie, no, he is a completely singular focused on that. And every other part of his life has atrophied or even never even got a chance to develop.
You mean human relations and whatnot? Like
everything.
No, I know. I remember seeing John have tantrums and being upset about things, and he was just very much like it was definitely, from my view, knowing him and knowing people who worked on the show, he's sort of this totalitarian dictator for the good of cartoons.
Yes.
But in terms of just relating to people, that was a skill that he didn't really develop.
Correct. Yeah.
I mean, it shows you, also wildly talented, right? I mean, it shows you also the cost, right? Like,
that's exactly right. What is the cost for this level of excellence? And are most people willing to do that? Not really. I mean,
how does this affect the legacy of Ren and Stimpy? Because it was kind of making a comeback. Because I kind of feel like 90s nostalgia is here, right? Mm-hmm. Like we're re-looking at things from the 90s now through a new lens and whatnot. And how is this going to affect the legacy? And how many people, because I remember when the story broke about John, it was, this is how it's weird. Like, a couple weeks on the internet, and something that happened 2 weeks ago is like, whatever. Yeah. That was just 2 weeks ago. I think the only thing holding up is Baby Yoda. I think Baby Yoda is going to be the thing that is still going to be around a year from now.
Yeah.
Right. But something that happened 2 years ago, people's memory of it, I don't know. Like, how does this affect the legacy of Ren and Stimpy, and what are some of the people who were involved? What are their thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on that?
I think in the long run, it's going to be fine. Mm-hmm. That's just how, you can take any number of cases. The Charlie Sheen thing. That was crazy. Now nobody cares,
right.
And so I think over time it'll get back to its, the nostalgia will take over and ultimately rule, which is, people have to understand how powerful nostalgia is. And especially, and unfortunately, I don't have that nostalgia because I never grew up with the show. Right. So,
well, that's why I think you guys are such great filmmakers with approaching this. Is you're not blinded by fandom and nostalgia.
Yeah,
is you're aware of the legacy and the impact of the show.
Yeah,
but not like a sycophantic fan.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, because we always talked about this. We always thought, well, if we would want to put in all these episodes that we watch this, and you want to put in all that stuff that you remember. And since we don't have any of those memories, we just saw it from a wider lens.
Totally. It was as bad as enough. Just starting to become fans because our first director's cut was 2.5 hours long, and we started doing that.
Well, there's just so much great stuff,
Yeah.
and you know, when people talk about this, all documentary guys talk about this, is the killing your babies, which is what we learned from our first
Definitely.
editor.
Right.
And for those who don't know, it's when you have really great scenes, but you can't put them in because they just don't advance the story further, or they're saying exactly what this other thing is saying. And so you're like, but it's so good, and it doesn't matter. So you got to throw it away. And we have hours of that stuff. So
You can put it on the DVD.
that is correct. Yes, we can.
Right?
Yes, that is correct.
Well, so there will be a Blu-ray DVD.
Yeah.
I'm hoping.
Yes.
Where do people stand who used to work with John when this came out? Where, like, I know that people commented in the doc, you were, you became close with many of the players, like Richard Purcell you mentioned. What were their thoughts?
It was kind of a varying degree of some people were just really angry. Some people, as it was kind of said in the film, is like the characters are covered with shit paint. Hopefully I can say that.
Right.
Yeah.
You can say,
Okay.
you can say shit paint.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Fair enough. Because and for some of them, it was such a special time in their lives, and it's. I mean, how many people work on? You could go your whole career with never working on a cultural icon. You know what I mean? And like to work on a cultural icon and then have it get stained, it's sad, and there is a certain amount of upset with John, and again, I think that will fade. Somebody like Chris Riccardi said it, like, look, I wouldn't take that credit away from him. He still deserved that credit.
Yeah, I mean, it just
which
begs
is tough.
And this is something that I think we're just grappling with as fans of all things pop culture, music, movies, TV, is how do you separate the art from the artist?
Yeah.
This is a thread throughout your documentary, but it's something that I think is an ongoing conversation about all of this. As they say, don't meet your heroes, right?
Right.
So
That's true.
How does one do that? Look at R. Kelly, right? Like,
right.
and
Michael Jackson. I mean, there's a lot of them.
It goes on and on.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say the best way to deal with it is that it wasn't just John who made Ren and Stimpy. There was a ton of other artists that made that show. A lot of other artists. So if you have problems, with grappling with John, then it's like, well, this is Bob Camp's episode, or this is Riccardi's episode, or Vince Waller. So you have all these other people that and we put it in the film. There's all these other people and John says it too. That contributed to the show. So if you need some help, that could be a help to still enjoy the show, is knowing that it's not just 100% John on every episode.
That's right.
Have you screened the film for people who are in the documentary?
Not yet, and it wasn't.
So John has not seen it.
No, he hasn't seen it. Robin hasn't seen it. It wasn't anything intentional. We've talked to them about showing it to him. Some of it's been logistical. But before I just want to mention one thing, and that's about Robin and how courageous she was in coming out and having that conversation. She kind of gave us a little bit of a heads up that this news was breaking, which we appreciated. It didn't make it any easier when it happened. But she really was an extraordinary interview, in that she was so, yes, there was some anger, and yes, there was anger at John, but she was just so eloquent and kind of stepping back from the whole situation and really analyzing not just her experience, but how we should look at it as artists and as fans of the show. And, because part of it too is there is that nostalgic factor that Kimo mentioned that's so powerful. And talking to a lot of fans, unfortunately, those interviews didn't make it in the film because of time, but they would say things like, the last time that I saw my mom smile was with watching a Ren and Stimpy episode before she died of cancer. Like, how do you then tell that person, like, no, you can't watch that show anymore?
Right.
Like, when they have that memory. And Robin, I don't want to give it away, but she addresses that factor in such an eloquent and thoughtful way. So I just wanted to, make sure that was known, because it was really an extraordinary interview and experience for us as filmmakers. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there. It's an important part of the film.
What do you expect the fallout to be when this film comes out and is? I mean, it's going to be seen by audiences at Sundance. Mm-hmm. Critics are going to write about it.
Sure.
I expect, based on the volatile nature, and interest in this subject matter, that this is going to be widely seen.
I hope so.
So, how does this advance the conversation?
Well, it's, as go ahead. You want to
no, go ahead, please.
Look, it's there to be discussed, and we were very clear going on, even though this may seem like an old school approach to making documentaries, is that we take this neutral stance. We're not. There's an intellectual laziness now, I think, and this is me going to be preaching a little bit, but when you just can turn on the news and you can be a CNN person or you can be a Fox person or whomever is giving you the opinion of the news, it fosters this intellectual laziness, because you don't have to think about it. You don't have to take both sides and distill an opinion. And we were very clear that this is a very complex issue, and because we started to know the people involved, and it isn't a cut and dried like a Weinstein, that you should look at it and look at it from many facets. And that should be your takeaway. You should be discussing it after the film ends. You shouldn't be looking at us to give you your opinion.
Well, that's what I love that the film does, and I do think that there are going to be people that are upset that you weren't damning toward John. So
There's always going to be those people.
Yeah.
But this is a great thing. Like Weinstein, he raped women. I mean,
he's a horrible human being.
I know, horrible human being.
Sorry.
No one argues this, right? John, and even the women he was involved with, they at the time, this was consensual relationship. Yeah. And it was even the way he describes, and there are good memories from that. There are, so it's very gray. Yeah. This was a consensual relationship, and then in retrospect was also an inappropriate one.
Correct.
Yeah. And also, is if you go on, certain forums, they'll just say this guy's a rapist. He's just that's all they say, and he just simply isn't. Mm-hmm. He's just not.
Well, he was not accused.
True.
He wasn't accused by.
No.
And these are not women that he was just with. He was in relationships with them. I mean, that lasted years.
Yes. With Robin.
With Robin.
With Katie, not.
Yeah.
But
they lived together.
Yes.
For how many years?
5.
5 years.
16 to 21, I think.
Yeah. So
and again, we're not being apologists. Let's be absolutely clear about this. That she was too young. He should not have done it. He's recognized that fact. Yeah. She suffered damage because of it, and there wasn't the awareness at that time that, even though there should have been, there wasn't. And again, we didn't want to go in and pulverize this guy, because we wanted the audience to make up their own decision. And there's going to be people that are going to be absolutely angry with us. And we wanted to make sure that we, as two white males, had as broad a view as possible of this subject. We brought in a psychotherapist to talk about this issue amongst ourselves, about the questioning. She wasn't there present for the interview with Robin, but some of the questions we brought by her. We didn't want to re-traumatize Robin, and we had an amazing feedback from our female editor, Christina Burchard, who also could weigh in on this stuff. Not that she was victims or anything like that, but actually the psychotherapist was, when she was a child, underwent sexual trauma. But and I should say she was very helpful in helping us get through this, and so we took great care in structuring the story and how we approached it.
Yeah, I don't think this is going to be the last documentary to take a look at this topic.
I hope not.
Yeah.
But it certainly opens up a conversation.
Yes.
It's unfortunate it has to be about a beloved, surrounding
totally
in the background, a beloved cartoon and these characters, Ren and Stimpy. I mean, where are they licensing wise with those characters? I mean, the thing about cartoon characters, they don't age.
Correct.
You can make new cartoons.
Well, I just read that there's the new Nickelodeon complex or whatever they built. There's a ride. there's a Ren Stimpy ride.
Wait, what?
And there's and there were the characters are
Oh wow.
there's like big. I just read it, so it's do your own research, but it was a Facebook group.
Oh, right.
And there's a new theme park or whatever that they have.
If the fans reported it, it's true.
That's true. Yeah.
They research.
But there was a photo of some complex of Nickelodeon's theme park thing, and there was a Ren Stimpy ride apparently. So
very cool.
I just wonder what percentage of the audience actually pays attention. That meaning. I know about this. I know the people, and as a super fan of many things, I'm intimately aware of these kinds of things. But I wonder if just the casual fan who just loves Ren and Stimpy.
Well, I heard Netflix has licensed it, so that's the last news I heard in October. That they, I'm not sure if it's all three of the Nicktoons, Rugrats, and what was the other?
Doug.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Doug. Okay.
Poor Doug always gets forgotten. But with Ren and Stimpy, it's sort of evergreen, and that was by design. Meaning that they didn't tackle topographical subjects like some of the other cartoons. Right. So when you look at it now, it doesn't feel dated. It's basic human emotion and psychosis, and so.
Yeah. Well, it's a lot of Looney Tunes stuff.
Yeah,
I was always a Looney Tunes fan as opposed to. I thought Disney cartoons were just sort of gentrified and safe, and I loved the sort of dangerousness of Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck and Wile E. Coyote, and just the Looney Tunes stuff was violent, and violence can be funny,
Right.
I mean, sort of a cartoon dynamite and fart jokes and
shooting the duck's bill and it goes around his head.
Daffy Duck, like like that's why Ren and Stimpy appealed to me. I'm just curious where we're going to be, once.
Well, we hope new fans after watching this, new art fans discover this show that never heard of it and don't know about it, and we're hoping that it brings a whole new audience.
Absolutely,
the people that never watched it growing up, people that want to get into animation. And I hope it becomes, the Chuck Jones of the modern era.
I do believe that the first half of the movie is like just incredibly inspiring story of sort of like doing sort of this huge like shift in the industry and animation and making the artists the focus instead of the corporate overlords or what their agendas are. That's amazing. The second half is like it's the topic goes more into John's psychosis and dealing with that. It has to be a form of therapy for him. I'm curious though. You're going into Sundance and you own the movie.
Yes,
you guys own the film. Maybe Netflix would buy it. Who knows? But where are you with that, and how to get into a little bit of the inside baseball? You have someone who's representing the film.
Yes,
guy I know, Josh Braun.
Yep, fine folks at Submarine. Yeah.
Yes, who are helping you. How does that feel going in? Because just the many stresses that you have to deal with as a filmmaker.
It's a relief.
Your movie's premiering at Sundance. You're probably going to throw up in the middle of the film and not watch it. You'll stay in the background. You'll get up and you're going to see whatever reaction. Someone, I predict this, will ask an uncomfortable question,
of course,
and something accusatory or be angry because there's always someone at Sundance that'll ask something where you're just like, okay, where are we going with this? In addition to that, now you got to deal with is the thing that made you sell your home and your car going to be worth the gamble? How do you navigate that kind of stress? And dress warmly.
So
layers, I recommend layers.
Tequila in the inside pocket works great.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A little inside baseball. So no names here, and but
just something that'll help any filmmakers watching this too, because this is a weird something that I don't think that we talk about the film all day, but what the behind the film, how are you dealing with that?
So we our kind of feeling was screen early, screen often to try and get our bearings as first time filmmakers. So of course we did a couple screenings. We're like, oh, that's not working. This isn't working. And gathering information and collecting data, and then the last screening, private screening we did. We had brought some industry people that were friends of ours. That we knew could keep a secret, and it got a very solid response by people that we respected. And then we started slowly sending it out to some agents, and then there was somebody that we found out was a little bit lower level employee, which we didn't realize until later at, one of the big services. And we're like, oh my God, this guy's going to get us in. And he came back and he gave us like this kind of crushing review, like you got to change the music and all this criticism. And at the time, we didn't quite realize where he was in the echelon of this group. And so we're like, oh my God, we're taking to this place and we just got this crushing review. What does this mean? And you take it personally because, like you said, we sold.
So you accidentally showed the movie to an intern,
basically.
You got it. I mean, seriously, just something that I know from coming from Detroit into Hollywood. I have a very highly tuned bullshit detector, and most people that you encounter in this industry are full of shit.
Absolutely.
That they're mostly people in Hollywood are just completely
100%.
Full of shit. You got to vet who they are. This is why the agent, manager, the sort
totally.
of, that's why that industry is so critical, because agents and managers will vet.
That's right.
They do the vetting.
That's right.
Because most people are full of crap, don't know what they're talking about.
100%. Yeah. And that was a great learning experience.
So you experienced that.
It was an amazing learning experience. It could not have happened at a better time because before Sundance and all that. So it was an amazing experience. And then, of course, less than a month later, we get the call from the folks at Sundance and, we were over the moon. And so,
but to answer your question, it's a huge relief having
to
knowing that people are going to handle a lot of that and our PR over there.
PR.
Yeah, so it's just it's just
PR
the big
hanging out.
relief knowing that we sort of have our hands held in that situation a little.
Well,
bit.
You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah,
that's a lot of it.
Well, it is a thing if you want to get the film out to a wider audience, you got to delegate some of these things. I mean, I think that a lot of DIY and indie filmmakers, I'm guilty of this myself, is I think you have to do everything.
That's right.
You got to do your own PR. And
that's right.
You do, under duress, sometimes you have to.
Sure.
Yeah.
You got to do that. I mean, no one's a better salesperson of the film than yourself, but you need your hand held on many things to, because as we pointed out earlier, and as you learned directly, lots of people are full of shit in Hollywood. They just are.
Yeah.
And
they may be sincere and wanting to help or whatever, but they just, there's a reason the guy's still an intern.
Can you imagine if you use the notes from this person at the company that was at lower level?
Well, we knew pretty immediately that we weren't going to take him seriously.
But this guy is great too. He is the most level. I'm the type A, like, oh my God, but this guy is falling. And Kimo's like, hey man, that's just one person that looked at the film. And I'm like, all right.
I mean, there going to be people that won't like this movie. It's just you're always going to have those people.
Yeah, right.
There's always going to be someone who's going to criticize. It is what it is.
Well, I think there are definitely many audiences. I think obviously one audience is fans of Ren and Stimpy.
Yep, sure.
That's an audience. But then there's going to be a completely new audience that comes to this going, this leans into a subject matter that is out there that we're dealing with as a culture.
Yep. Now, well, that was important to us, too, when we were making the movies. Like, it's easy to make a movie for just Ren and Stimpy fans.
Yeah.
But we don't want to alienate all these other people that would love this story, So that was important to balance sort of like the fans get their beak wet, but then also there's this whole other side that other people that never even heard of a cartoon can enjoy it. My mom could watch it and enjoy it. She's the only one that's never heard of Ren and Stimpy. My mom and my stepmom, two people that the only people I ever mentioned this project to that they went, I have no idea what you're talking about.
So I'm
that's awesome.
A sort of out of left field question, but the title of the film, Happy, Happy, Joy, Joy, was the title of the movie that you began with.
Yep. Right.
And after the all this, everything came to light about John Kricfalusi's relationship with young women. You didn't change the title.
No,
we kept the
barely
title Happy,
considered
Happy, Joy,
it.
Joy.
At some points, we considered it a little bit, but then once we start to look at it, we're like, oh no, this is a perfect title. I mean, we had mentioned it to people in at some get together, film get together, and we told them it's Happy Happy Joy Joy the Ren Stimpy. Oh, you need to change that.
Yeah, right.
Like immediately they're like,
Really?
oh, you got to get rid of that. That's just a working title, right? You got to get rid of that. So we did have a lot of people say that.
Well, here's the thing: it certainly takes on a whole new meaning.
Yes.
Well, if you even look at our poster that we made for the film, it's a darker poster. It's not a bright, thing.
Yeah,
So
we just loved it because it just seemed to embody the darkness of Ren and Stimpy and parts of the subject matter, but also there's that other side of it too. So, it was.
Have now that the documentary is complete and John knows this is coming out, have you spoken to him recently?
As soon as we got word, as soon as I got the phone call from Sundance, he was like the third person we reached out to, or thereabouts, because we wanted him to know right away, even though the news hadn't been public. And he said, "Oh, okay, this is great." And I said, "Look, whenever you want to chat, let me know." But I haven't heard from him. I do owe him a phone call. I should check in with him again just to let him know. We did invite him to Sundance, but he did not respond. And Robin will be there, and we're taking great efforts to make sure that situation is mitigated and everybody feels comfortable. So as far as we know, he's not going to be there. He has not made any overtures to say that he'll come. But that's kind of where we're at. But we got to sit down with him and show him the film, and we hope he likes it.
Well, Robin will be there.
Yes, she will.
And will other people from the film be there?
Yeah.
Richard Purcell.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, Vanessa Coffey, who deserves a huge amount of credit for getting the show off the ground.
Vanessa, she's great. I mean,
she's amazing.
I haven't talked to her recently, but knew her back in the day, and wow, she was just so incredibly talented.
Yeah, that is
amazing.
Really something that is overlooked because if it wasn't for her and her fighting for this show initially, it would have never gotten made.
Right.
And to her credit, she just went off this gut feeling that would never happen now. Can you imagine focus grouping Ren and Stimpy right now? How long would that last?
Sorry, I confused Vanessa with Lynn Naylor. What am I talking about?
Well, anyway, they're both amazing.
Right,
Lynn was John's girlfriend for a time and directly responsible for the a lot of the artwork as well and the development of the characters, but Vanessa was the network executive that greenlit it, and she
made the
one of the
gut
evil
call.
executives.
Yeah,
as John would.
Yeah, hardly evil at all.
No,
very, very
what I like that you did in the film is you showed their point of view, and I think the point of view is well represented. And you saw, I never knew that side, and I don't think that the public ever knew that side. And how do you even represent that side in a way that you're always going to look bad, right? The company is always going to look bad. So, my God. Kimo Easterwood, Ren Cicero, I wish you so much luck with the premiere at Sundance. I'm really curious to hear how that goes. I thank you for talking to us on the Film Threat podcast.
Yeah. Oh my God! Thanks for your support throughout. Yeah, really appreciate it.
And I really wish you luck on the film.
Thank you very much. Our pleasure.